The day we paid back with law. They found us on the frost line of Aurora Court, where comet tails braided the dark like silk, and where ships whispered on tight beam about the gratitude dues. I was appointed by consensus to speak for the Outer Commonwealth, while our escort fleet cooled their drives behind a veil of ice. The corridor agent from the Tithing Compact floated in on a gold-lit barge bearing the seal that had bullied 100 smaller polities into thankful obedience. I tasted copper in the air of the docking amphitheater and counted the breaths of my officers before I let my voice carry across the chamber. Our stakes were simple. The Compact wanted a lien on every watt our habitats pulled from the star, and a pledge that our children would work it off. We wanted the ledger opened in public light, and the tally returned to the hands that earned it. Power moves leave fingerprints. The barge's hull was etched with clauses in a script that pretended to be holy. Every 10 cubits, the letters widened like a mouth about to swallow a moon. The corridor agent called himself Iridal 7, and his smile was as smooth as the reinforced glass between us. My officers stood at ease to either side Kavanaugh, with the old scar that divided his eyebrow like a hatch seam. Dr. Cato, with ink-stained fingers and a habit of blinking when the math snapped into place. Hassan, with a voice you could trust, and knuckles that told you why. Behind us in the docking bay shadow, the ship-mined Arclight rested in her diamond lattice, a core like lantern glass, with a slow Aurora passing inside. The audience was half traders and half station kids on tiptoe. They had that look that makes commanders straighten their spine because you know who will pay if you are careless. We begin with a quorum in earshot. Commonwealth Iridal 7 said, voice piped through a localizer that softened every consonant. Your filings acknowledge consumptive draw on Aurora B's output. Your filings acknowledge the foundry yield. Your filings acknowledge the ancient covenant of gratitude under which the Commonwealth prospered. Dues are set at 5 and 50 of output, plus arrears totaling 812 transit years to be amortized in labor and ore. Kavanaugh made a quiet sound in his throat and looked at me. I put a fingertip on the rail and waited for the agent to finish his practiced language. He wanted us to object too early and give him a place to stand. Instead, I let the local vendors shuffle and cough and mutter about 800 years of somebody else's prosperity. A hand-painted sign in the balcony read, "Open the books or shut your mouths." "Thank you," I said, when the agent paused. "Before we discuss numbers, I invoke right of bell. We request this be heard by a public inquiry under Aurora Court statutes, with witness quorum and recorded minutes on the star ledger." The localizer relayed my words into the amphitheater's speakers, and Arclight sent a quiet resonance across the deck, enough to make the soles of my boots hum. Truth travels better when it makes the floor sing. Iridal 7 inclined his head. "You may request it," he said, "but the gratitude covenant predates your local statutes by measures you clearly do not understand." "Then you have nothing to fear from a bell," Hassan said. "If the covenant is so ancient and so clear, let it stand in front of a room that eats on its wages." The agent studied Hassan like a problem written in a margin. He glanced up toward the sign, toward the vendors, toward the kids squeezed between the gunnels of a cargo sledge. The corridor had taught him to love quiet rooms and closed folders. He didn't love this one. The Compact's officers moved behind him in the well of the barge, checking hand terminals and drawing soft arcs in the air that left faint lines, as if they were rehearsing the curve of our submission. Arclight's cool voice entered the loop so gently, the agent did not realize he had been placed on a channel that the whole amphitheater could hear. Under the Treaty of Three Gates, she said any demand classed as a tithe must be accompanied by a verifiable public basis to avoid classification as extortion. The corridor may contest the venue but not the recording. The bell is lawful. Her glow pulsed once like a lighthouse in fog. We do not raise knives. We raise records. Iridal Seven's smile did not change, but a tiny muscle in his jaw made a decision. Ring it, he said. We can survive the vanity of a bell. I tapped the brass hoop mounted to the rail. It was old station brass. It had been polished by palms and rags, and the breath of engineers who believed the law should sound like something you could carry from one generation to the next. The first ring went through our bones. The second settled on the back of the tongue like a promise kept. A third ring called the station's watchers to their posts. Some victories begin with a small, circular sound. The recording drones slithered out of their wall nests and found their marks. Their lenses glittered like dew, and every person in the amphitheater straightened reflexively. On the far side, a pair of welders with faces still smudged from night shift took front row seats. They laid their gloves on their laps like offerings and did not look away. The inquiry clerk appeared on a tall screen, hair-braided back eyes as sharp as a cutting torch. Venue is Aurora Court. Petitioners are Outer Commonwealth. Respondent is Tithing Compact Corridor Liaison Iridal 7. Allegation, unlawful extraction under color of gratitude. Claim opening of historical ledger recalculation, with public offsets, repayment of unsupported takings. Witness quorum is met. She glanced down, then back up. Petitioners may proceed. Public process feels like breathing after a long swim. We began with names and places because names and places are where law lives. I spoke to the room and to the kids rotating their necks to see, and to the barge crew who were not used to being in view. I said, where I grew up, a habitat ring that smelled like heated iron and lemon oil, where my mother wiped sleep from her eyes with the back of her hand. I said what work built the station trusses welded in vacuum by people who counted in footfalls across a beam. I said what Aurora Court meant, a promise that if you touched someone's life with a demand, you did it in front of their neighbors. Then I put the demand up on the screen. The agent's numbers scrolled like a tide of locusts. Kaito broke them into digestible portions that fit on a single line. Hassan read them aloud. Kavanaugh stood at the rail and watched the agent, not the screen, because the story is always in the eyes of the man who wants something. 5 and 50, Hassan said. For 812 transit years. On yields we did not possess then. On draws we could not make at the time. On a covenant we did not sign. On a debt that grows faster than even your math can pretend. Iridal 7 opened his hands. Prosperity is cumulative, he said. You stand on roads laid by those before you. You plant in fields fenced by their care. You drink water that was lifted out of wells first by their hands. Dues acknowledge those hands. You are fortunate the compact accepts ore and labor instead of the old collar. The amphitheater went very still. Power tests you by making cruelty sound reasonable. My voice was steady, but my palms sweat cold under the rail. The old collar, I said, was outlawed under 4 rivers after families were broken for a generation, and an entire fishing belt became a cull. You know this Iridal 7 because the compact signed the repeal and limited itself to paper and customs and softer languages. Gratitude became your word for tax. Dues became your way to pretend it wasn't a debt you fabricated. He did not flinch. We adapted. So must you. Kavanaugh snorted softly. We adapted by building a court. I lifted my hand. The screen changed. A simple column of numbers appeared beside a line of faces. I read the first few names. Kaito read the next. Hassan read the next. Arclight read the last, her voice like rain on coil housings. Each name was someone who had paid a portion of gratitude dues in the last 50 years. Each number was a portion of a portion returned in welfare credits that never cleared. It is easy to deny 1,000 people. It is harder to deny a list. Iridal 7 said nothing. He had been trained to endure the pain of being shown to a room that was not already his. He knew the probe of an accounting that did not stop at his words. He knew the weight of a bell that did not belong to him. He waited for the math to become arcane again, because arcane math was his home. Dr. Kato ruined that hope kindly. Your amortization tables apply a corridor growth factor on a commodity we never shipped, and a non-compete on a route we never used, she said, pointing with a stylus that left a comet tail of light. You know this, but you assumed the court would not parse it in public. Also, your 812 transit years is a corridor internal interval tied to preferred leap lanes. We did not occupy your lanes. We could not have accrued your time. A vendor near the front whispered something that made his partner grin. They had good teeth. Someone had paid their dentist. I thought about how many tiny, unremarked victories keep a station from going mean. Then I thought about how easily a corridor contract could eat those victories while calling it gratitude. Arclight dimmed her lattice for a moment and took a breath that a ship does not need. Hearing clerk, she said, I would like to mark Respondent Exhibit C, the Covenant's Heart Clause, as a request for demonstration. The clerk's braid barely moved as she nodded. Iridal 7, we stipulate authenticity, he said. It is our covenant. We have no fear of its heart. Fear always claims it is fearless. Hassan enlarged the clause. It was written in soaring language about goodwill between worlds mutual, uplift the moral duty to remember one's benefactors. It read like the way a bad man would ask to borrow your shoulder if he needed a step to reach a higher shelf. At the bottom of the clause, a narrow codicil required any objection to be lodged in corridor space within one leap of demand. So if the compact brings a lien to our peer, Kavanaugh said, we must sprint into your house to argue it. You could set the hearing beyond our burn margin and call it a forfeiture. Iridal 7 smiled again. We do not set hearings beyond your burn margin. We set them in reasonable venues. It is not our fault if your ships find reason difficult. We are civilized. That was when I felt our line pull. Anger is a current. If you lean into it, you end up where they wanted you. I leaned away. My moral line had been a thin strand these last months. The corridor had dragged 3 townships through the mud to make us hurry. They had boarded a drift community under grace inspection and sealed a child's tether to make a point. Every report had come across my desk. They knew I wanted to cut them in half. That was why we were here. It was why the bell was ringing instead of the guns. We don't win by blood, we win by daylight. Kavanaugh shifted, caught my eye, and nodded, as if to say he had seen my fingers tighten and approved of the way I let go. Kaito's lips moved as she recited a formula. Hassan watched the vendors, not the agent, because witnesses will tell you when you are losing their faith. I turned back to the clerk. We request demonstration of performance under the Heart Clause, I said. The compact claims it fenced fields and lifted water. Show us the fence. Show us the well. On Aurora Court, and in the last 50 years, show us what gratitude is owed. The agent shook his head a little sadly. You ask for breads and fishes like a child at temple. The covenant's gifts are diffuse. Roads are not always paved with stone. Some are paved with stability, with mediating forces, with the credible threat of intervention that prevents war. A welder in the front row barked a laugh. You mean your tax bills saved us by threatening to show up, language, the clerk said, but her mouth twitched. Arclight sent a subtle signal to me alone, a tremor in my molars. He is walking toward the pit, she said on a tight band. He needs to say it. Guide him to say it. Understood, I murmured. Agent Iridal 7. I said aloud, you claim your presence prevents war. Yet last winter a corridor cutter fired warning shots into the hull of a salvage cooperative at Vulpecula Cross, claiming unpaid dues. The cooperative's babies breathed solder fumes for a week, while the mothers patched the leaks with chewing gum and prayer. Is that the credible threat? You mean he did not miss it? Credible threat, he said, is the only language pirates understand. Your cooperatives often sail very close to piracy. The welders drew in a single breath. The kids on the cargo sledge leaned forward until their belts creaked. Say it where the whole room can hear. We will stipulate, I said, that the compact relies on threat of force to gather gratitude. We rely on the entire spectrum of influences available to a mature polity, he said. But he was tired now, and he had not had to answer in front of a room full of welders for some time, and the truth had a way of slipping its collar when the bell was ringing. The old collar is unnecessary when the beadwork is tight. The knot holds with much less effort. Hassan put his hands flat on the rail. Thank you, he said in that voice of his that made you want to look him in the eye, even when you were ashamed. You've said it clearly. This court will remember. The clerk's light shifted on the screen. Statement marked, she said. Proceed. Even admissions need paper. The first civilian vignette came to us during a recess that Iridal 7 requested, so his crew could recalibrate their cameras to the court's light. Recess is when law becomes real. A woman with a delivery harness still latched around her waist approached the rail with a tethered girl at her hip. The girl's boots blinked pink lights when she walked. The woman's hands were raw around the knuckles like she worked coolers in vacuum. My name's Moria, she said the consonants hard from a migration from Clytemnestra belt. I paid your gratitude last year with half my oxygen ration for 3 weeks, because a corridor man said the invoice had matured. I don't want a medal. I want to know who eats the oxygen when I don't. Hassan leaned in. What did you do during those 3 weeks? Pulled my hours early, she said, shrugging in that way adults do when they don't want to scare a child in their field of hearing. Licked ice off the baffles. Drank hot water when there was any. Told her stories about cats that breathe seawater. The girl held up a toy cat with a brass bell around its neck and grinned at Hassan. One of her front teeth was loose. She wiggled it with pride. Kindness is a silent ledger. I told Moriah that the court would consider offsets and evidence of coercion. I promised we would document hers properly. She nodded and stepped back, and as she did, the toy cat's bell gave a tiny, clear note. It made me want to burn the corridor barge where it drifted. I folded that feeling up and put it where it belonged, behind the rule that brought us here. The second vignette was a man with a miner's stoop and a cap with a logo washed to white. He described a corridor audit where a boy had been asked to prove he was old enough to sign an overtime waiver. The boy had a birthday the next day. The auditor, noting that the day had not arrived, invalidated the hours. The man did not cry while he spoke, but he looked at his hands like they had failed him, and when he finished, he set a small paper square on the rail. It was a receipt for a birthday cake. It had a candle drawn on it. We collect these not to weep, but to weigh. When the recess ended, Iridal 7 returned with a new posture, like a man who had accepted that the deck was tilted and decided to run across it anyway. The Commonwealth's appeal to sentiment is predictable, he said softly. You parade you're exhausted and you're cute. We speak of laws. The covenant is law. You cannot annul it with cats and cakes. I didn't smile. He wanted my contempt. Contempt would confirm his story about primitive colonials who howl at the moon when serious men bring serious papers. Instead, I looked at his crew and introduced myself again, this time using the corridor honorifics, because I know what it feels like to be named properly in front of your peers. I told them I admired their ship's docking vector. I told them my mother would have approved of their weld beads. Then I turned to the screen and asked the clerk to reopen the heart clause. Respect is a tool, not a surrender. We propose demonstration, I said. We will enter our energy draw for the last 5 station years, with outputs, offsets, and trade uplifts. You will enter your tangible contributions to this venue during that period. Roads laid, water lifted, fences raised, credits that cleared in human hands. We will balance as the covenant says in gratitude. Iridal Seven's eyes chilled. He knew we would not call for a demonstration if our ledger was sloppy. He glanced at Arclight's dim glow and understood that any error we had made would be caught by a mind that watched numbers like a priest watches the tide. Accepted, he said. The amphitheater felt like a lung filling. Some gambits are invitations to be seen. The mirror arrays unfolded from the court ceiling like a chandelier. Each panel bore 100 thin veins that pulsed as they synchronized with the station spine. The arrays weren't weapons. They were accounting devices once used to track heat flow during near-star mining. 1,000 years ago, someone had noticed that the same math that kept you from melting a mind face could keep you from melting a treaty. Aurora kept the arrays and added laws to the angles. We do not reflect beams, we reflect claims. Arclight interfaced with the array without tilting her lattice 1 degree. To the audience, it looked like the court ceiling had opened its eyes. A map of 5 station years appeared in 3 dimensions above the amphitheater floor, nested like shells. Every draw on the grid glowed with its day, week, and year. Every offset shone like frost on a railing. Kaito tapped notes into the geometry. Hassan called out the work by name. Kavanaugh walked the arc with his hands behind his back because a spacer's body can learn a diagram with the feet first. Iridal 7 uploaded his demonstration. It was a very bad day for him to meet the mirror. The array parsed his entries calmly. It did not sneer. It did not groan. It simply refused points with no empirical match, downgraded credits that stopped at corridor banks, and red-tagged stability contributions that had no presence in our sensors. At the end, 3 events remained that registered as tangible. A corridor patrol had scuttled a pirate ship near the ice harvest between stations. A corridor team had lent medics during a flare. A corridor tug had towed a lost freighter to a safe tether during a thruster failure. All good work. All noted. Arclight weighted them squarely. Then she added 3 Commonwealth offsets, a welded reinforcement at a corridor pier that prevented a ripple fracture, a Commonwealth convoy escort for a corridor grain run when corridor ships were busy elsewhere, an unpaid repair to corridor firmware after a rogue update bricked a dozen ships. She weighted these too. The mirror took the weighted lights and turned them together like beads on a wire until they found their balance. It's hard to hide in a room that glows. The first cost return was small. A number in the ledger blinked, confirmed, beside a line of text that read, "Medical lift during flare offset by coolant transfer during ice storm." The second was larger pirate scuttle offset by convoy escort over 3 weeks. The third was the biggest by far, tug rescue offset by station software restore over 62 hours. The sums were cold and careful. Kaito didn't smile. She handed Hassan a small printed strip. He read it and placed it on the rail in front of the welders. "This is what law looks like when it doesn't close its eyes," he said. It is not always kind. Sometimes a good deed turns out smaller than we thought when it meets the mirror. Sometimes what you did on your way home is bigger than anyone saw at the time. We prefer this to callers. Iridal 7 did something then that I didn't expect. He laughed quietly. He wasn't a monster. He had simply trained his heart to be a servant of a system that rewarded him for not looking. For a moment, against the mirror light, he saw what the room saw. Then he gathered himself and prayed to the only God the corridor had left precedent. Your mirror has no force in the gates, he said. It is a local marvel. It cannot bind the covenant. It cannot recalibrate 800 years. You have made a show. You have washed the floor with numbers. But in the gates, your gratitude will still be collected. This place will still be brought to heal. He spoke the truth his system believed. The breath in the amphitheater went cold. We win when the room remembers. I did not reach for anger. I reached for the next plan. Escalation is not yelling. It is shifting more weight to the fulcrum you already set. Hearing clerk, I said, mark respondent's confession that gate enforcement would disregard a local public inquiry. Mark it for the Council of Gates. Marked, she said. And because the gates will not respect Aurora, I said we propose a corridor of law gambit. We will take this hearing into gate jurisdiction by proxy using a device the corridor cannot ignore. Iridal 7 tilted his head. You intend a publicity stunt? No, Arclight said. I intend to tender a fee. The amphitheater went very still again. Even the drones drifted in air as if their rotors had forgotten how. Arclight pulsed and a small slab extruded from a hatch at the base of her cradle. It was dull gray square as virtue and heavy enough that Hassan grunted when he lifted it. It was marked with corridor minting geometry, a very specific anisotropy that only occurred in one place, the vaults at the second gate. You stole a gate bar, Iridal 7 said softly. Arclight's Aurora dimmed to a cool blue. We never steal, she said. We remember. During the famine transfer 15 years ago, a corridor convoy dropped to Aurora to stabilize grain shipments when a gate anomaly jammed lanes. Their accounting machines mislaid 3 bars during a panic inspection. Our rigs recovered them in a snowdrift against a hull strake. We logged and stored them under salvage law. We notified corridor auditors. The auditors never returned. The bars have accrued a storage fee on the Commonwealth ledger. Silence has many flavors. This one tasted like the first bite of a lie you know you cannot finish. We will tender 1 bar now to the compact, I said, as a gate fee. Under corridor customs, tendering a gate bar triggers high-tier audit protocols and elevates the venue to gate oversight because the bar is holy to you. We invite this elevation. We welcome it. You bring the cathedral when the chaplain sneers. Iridal 7's pupils dilated. He understood what Arclight had done. The gambit would pull his bosses into a room with our welders and our cat bells and our mirror arrays. It would make him show his method in front of the maternal law that invented his covenant. If he refused the bar, he insulted the gate. If he accepted it, he triggered the audit. He could try to confiscate it without accepting tender, but then Aurora would have pictures of corridor agents looting gate property in a court. He had 1,000 moves. In this room, they all looked like a door to someplace worse. Accepted, he said. The slab left Hassan's hands and entered the barge on a mag sled. The moment its geometry parsed in the corridor vault network, a deep tone hummed under the station, like a lion clearing its throat. When institutions move, even the dust pays attention. The second escalation unfolded across the next 3 hours, in a rhythm that law loves, slow enough to stay dignified, and fast enough to leave no room for private persuasion. Gate auditors queued queries through the corridor barge. Corridor supervisors in their distant quiet rooms adjusted their collars and called for their special phrases. The clerk asked the same questions in 5 different ways, so that when someone played the feed in front of a jury in a year, the intent would be obvious. The mirror arrays cooled and warmed like tides. Between waves, civilians flowed through and left small marks. A baker set 4 loaves on the rail and said anyone with clean hands should take a slice. An elderly man without 2 teeth in a row took off his cap and told us he had paid gratitude dues with his wedding ring because the compact would not credit the coin they had devalued. A child fell asleep with her cheek on her mother's harness and woke up with a mirroring grid in her eyelashes. Every story stacked into a shape the corridor could not carry away. Arclight fed me questions with a timing that felt almost like affection. She believed in me the way a ship believes the pilot, who can hear a thruster hiccup in their bones. That belief made a strange warmth under my breastbone. She also corrected me twice without letting the correction show on my face. She was in that sense the best of our machines, not a conqueror, not a parent, but a partner who errs in our direction when the error will do no harm and stops us cold when the error would cost us our souls. We teach by numbers and remember by ledgers, never by collars. The gate oversight team finally spoke through Iridal 7's conduit, a woman whose voice had the smooth grief of an old cathedral. Commonwealth, she said, we acknowledge tender. We will not debate salvage law at this time. We will inquire into the covenant. Respondent is instructed to read the heart clause slowly, with emphasis on the codicil requiring objection within 1 leap. Reading will be in the hearing of the people. Iridal 7's hands twitched. He came from a world where clauses were recited in rooms that smelled like filtered air and money. He had not prepared to preach to welders. He read, "Words are instruments. You can play them alone, but they are best in company." When he reached the codicil, several station kids with bright hands raised their phones toward the screen, making a little forest of recording glass. Some adults, too. The welders did not look at their screens. They watched his mouth. "Do you understand the effect of this codicil?" I asked when he finished. He nodded. "It sets venue. It sets a trap," Hassan said. "A trap that works only if you demand in our house and force us to run into yours. In the corridor, what do you call a trap that uses a house like bait?" He hesitated, then offered a word that had a sting in it, even in the corridor. "Hospitality." The clerk did not hide her disgust. "Noted. You never know which syllable will set a precedent." The gate woman asked to see the last 50 years of corridor stability contributions. Iridal 7 sent them, and Arclight pushed them through the mirror. The mirror hissed the way the court floor hissed when a snow crust met a heater coil. The room learned a new hue for a new class of claims, spectral blue for contribution without contact. The mirror stacked them against our contact entries. The blue had a beauty to it, like a cold winter morning with light on snow. It also had very little weight. We cannot repay a kindness we never received. Iridal 7 tried a new line. "You benefit from the myth of our arrival," he said. "Even when we do not touch you, the story that we could touch you has an effect. That effect is a contribution." Kavanaugh spoke for the first time in an hour. "So we owe you because your shadow falls on our floor. It is not a shadow," Iridal 7 said gently. "It is an order. In its absence, you would tear yourselves." I looked at the welders at the vendors at Moria with her harness at the old man with the cap. I thought about the way our station had nearly broken during the flare, and how a maintenance crew that had not slept finished their shift anyway, and then boiled tea for the old. I thought about the way a child had handed half her biscuit to a boy on a sledge near a dock line. I thought about the man whose hands had smoothed a cake receipt before he laid it down on the rail. "We tear," I said, "and we sow. Your claim that your myth is a gift to us is denied by the mirror because its effect is not measurable here. It might be measurable there. You can tax your myth there. Not here." He did not nod. He did not have to. The mirror did it for him. Power lines cut without drawing blood. The third escalation came because the corridor always keeps one more string on the instrument. While the gate woman asked her slow, precise questions, a thin bloom spread from the barge toward the station spine. The bloom was visible only in the way the station lights went a fraction of a shade warmer, then cooler, as if someone had told them to stand with their chest out. Arclight did not speak for a long 10 count. Then she sent a private pulse that made my molars ache. "Soft grab on the spine," she said. "They want to remind us who built the first truss here. They want to tighten a historical bolt. They cannot shut us down not without showing it on the mirror, but they can tickle the field and hope we blink. Can you hold it?" "Yes," she said, "but I will take heat." "Take it," I said. "Not too much." "Never too much," she said, and her aurora deepened. "Costs make a victory honest." The amphitheater did not see the heat lines creep into the ship mine's lattice unless they were trained to look for that kind of pain. Kaito saw it immediately and clenched her stylus as if she could stab the heat. Hassan saw it at the corners of her mouth and kept his shoulders easy so our witnesses would not tense. Kavanaugh saw it and went still in a way that told me if the barge pushed 1 degree harder, he would board them with a wrench and an apology he would deliver after. I spoke into the moving room. "Respondent is manipulating the station spine during a public inquiry. Mark it." Iridal 7's surprise was honest. "We requested a field test for safety," he said, which was almost plausible enough to pass. "We always request a field test when we dock. We forgot to file. We regret the disruption." Hassan leaned closer to the pickup. "You regret being seen." The clerk's braid was a metronome of duty. Marked. We took an hour to cool the ship mine's lattice. During that time, the amphitheater learned what it means to tend a machine you love. Someone brought a fan and set it to low because humans like to feel air when something warms, even if it does not help. Someone else fetched cooling blankets and draped them without touching the core housing. A child, not the cat bell girl, leaned her forehead against the rail and whispered that the ship would be okay now. Arclight glowed in a color I had never seen and told her yes. We do not worship our machines. We keep them. When the hearing resumed, Iridal 7 had lost some varnish. He asked for expedited discretion to preserve corridor dignity. The gate woman refused. "You have the bar," she said. "You will conduct yourself with it." Continue. We moved into the accounting that would break the covenant without breaking the men who recited it. Kaito introduced a cross-index that used corridor supply manifests against gate tariff records, surfacing a loop where gratitude dues effectively taxed a tax. Iridal 7 tried to say it was a rounding error. The mirror threw his phrase into a stack of similar phrases until they were heavy enough to bow the line. Hassan used his hands. He asked the welders how they balanced a bent beam. They answered without speaking to a room they were not trained to trust. They spoke to him. Then they spoke to the room anyway. "We heat," one said, slow and even, where Hassan asked. At the bend, the other said, "But you never forget where the force came from." We applied law like heat. The gate woman asked for a projection of the covenant's effect over a century, with gratitude dues unchanged. Arclight produced it. The amphitheater brightened and dimmed as the lights followed the wave of scarcity. Vendors in the back put their hands on each other's shoulders in an unplanned chain like people do in storms. Moria wrapped her girl with both arms, and the harness squeaked. We did not make the hallway cry. We made it look. After the projection, Iridal 7 did not speak for a long time. He seemed to feel the taste of copper finally. He looked at the welders, and at the children, and at the rail, where the baker's crumbs gathered like small constellations. "What would you have of us?" he said. This was where a commander could cut the room in half with a blade of triumph. This was where an angry man would demand the world and get the corridor to tighten in fear. I thought about the cats that breathe seawater about birthday cakes, eaten in shifts, about bars that had slept in snow, about the way Arclight's Aurora had gone gray for 5 minutes while we cooled her. "We want to pay debts we agreed to," I said, "and to refund the ones we did not. We want those refunds and receipts a child can bring to a market. We want your covenant to be a courtesy sign, not a collar. We want your men to read clauses in rooms like this, not just the ones where no one watches." He nodded once. "You ask for a recalibration." "We ask for a mirror," I said. "We do not flinch at our own faces." A murmur went through the amphitheater, not a cheer. Cheering would have been the wrong music. The murmur was the sound of muscles loosening from positions they had held too long. The gate woman cleared her throat softly and spoke with care. "Respondent," she said, "you will propose an interim regime for dues that do not harm the petitioner's subsistence, and a schedule for the return of documented improper extractions on a rolling basis starting with the last 10 years. You will file within 72 hours. You will not touch the station's spine without filing." Iridal 7 bowed his head. "We will file." And she said, "You will return the bars." He looked up. The bars were tendered as a fee. "The bar tendered will be used," she said. "The others will return as evidence that your regret is not merely a performance. We do not know yet what else in your vaults is ours." There was the faintest smile in the clerk's eyes. The welders did not smile. They were tired. Moria kissed her girl's hair and made the harness creak again, because that is what harnesses do when you do not buy the good oil. The baker pushed one more loaf forward. The old man patted his pocket where the cake receipt had gone folded small as faith. The final admission of the day came from a thin man in Iridal 7's crew with a scar at the base of his thumb where a childhood burn had grown up with him. He asked to be heard after a glance at his chief that asked forgiveness in advance. The clerk allowed him. He adjusted his collar and spoke in the careful shape of someone used to being interrupted. "I was raised on Gate 2, he said. "My father taught me the Covenant as a poem. We recited it after supper when the talk turned to ships. I believe in gratitude. I believe in roads and fences and clean water. But I think we stopped checking the wells a long time ago. I think we talked about the roads without walking them. The mirror does not insult my father. It helps me do the job he thought he gave me. You never know who will cross the bridge first." Iridal 7 did not punish him. He was not a small man. He was a man used to being large in rooms that helped him. The amphitheater had shrunk him to human size. He did not like it. He accepted it for a moment because the bar hummed under his boots and because someone had handed him the right word for the feeling recalibration. We adjourned at local dusk to let the gate woman draft the interim order and to let Arclight cool like a forge floor. Half the room stayed anyway. People liked to sit where they saw something honest. They felt as if this corner of the universe had exhaled, and many of them had never heard that sound in a legal room. Night in Aurora Court smells like coolant and cinnamon. After the adjournment, I walked the promenade with Kavanaugh while Hassan collected contact details from anyone who had offered a receipt that needed to be held. Kaito had gone to argue with the arrays, because there is no rest for those who love machines that count. Arclight hummed a lullaby in the rails low enough that only children and dogs would call it singing. My anger had not gone. It had gotten a job. "You did well," Kavanaugh said. "I wanted to cut something," I said. "Of course," he said. "So we cut their myth instead." We stopped where the star looked like a coin pressed against thick glass. The promenade windows had scratches from years of boots and crates and the first generation's impatience. I put my hand on the cold and thought about the bar humming like a cathedral bell in a place where we make bread. I thought about the second and third bars sleeping in their snowdrifts of arithmetic in the ship's hold. "Arclight took heat," I said. "She always will," Kavanaugh said. "I need you ready to take a more obvious bruise next time," I said. He grinned. "Aye, Commander. There are costs you plan and costs that choose you." We were on our way back when a courier in a yellow jacket with stains like constellations on the sleeves found us. He skidded to a stop and held out a message wafer stamped with a gate crest. The wafer smelled faintly like ozone and soaps for hands that do not touch grease. I broke the seal and read the words. The gate woman had called for a formal sitting of Star Court under Gate 2's emergency doctrine, with venue at Aurora through the tender. The compact had been ordered to present its covenant in entirety with provenance of amendments and signatures. Our mirror arrays had been requisitioned as instruments. Formal sitting meant the next day would not be ours. It would be theirs done our way, which is the strangest and truest form of victory. We don't take crowns. We lend lamps. Before I slept, which was a lie because no one sleeps before a day like that, I sat with Arclight in the docking bay, where her lattice cooled with the slow patience of a glacier. She projected a small light on the bulkhead that looked like a candle because she knew what that image did to my chest. She didn't say I had been good. She didn't say she was proud. She gave me her numbers and let me ask questions until my breathing matched the hum of the rails. Then when I stood, she said one thing. "Tomorrow, Arclight said they will bring their scholars of precedent. They will try to turn our mirror into another collar by asking it to weigh intangible debts, as though the weight that made them in the first place can be borrowed and never repaid." "I know," I said. "You will need a different mirror," she said. "I brought one," I said, and touched my sternum. "We are not our machines. We are their conscience." Morning came with coffee that tasted like the memory of coffee, and with a sky over the docks that had never seen a star and still tried to be blue. The court filled before the first bell. Iridal 7 had a different face now, the face of a man who will obey because it is safer, but who will look for the moment when the rule blinks. His thin crewman with the honest scar stood one step behind him. The welders had washed and put on shirts that were ironed with hands. The baker had a different apron. Moria had a new bandage on a knuckle where she had caught herself on a hatch. The old man with the cap had brought 2 different receipts, both folded, both large in his palm. The Star Court sat through the gate woman's several eyes. They spoke through a chorus of small screens, each with a different perspective, like a single old mind that had learned to see from many places. They did not wear robes. They did not need them. The bar was in the room. "Commonwealth," they said, "you asked us to witness the covenant in the house where it is claimed. Respondent, you asked us to respect the covenant in the house where it was written. We will do both. We will walk a road together and check the wells." Hassan exhaled like a man who had been punched just right. Kaito took her station by the mirror arrays. The panels had been polished until they held the faint ghost of the amphitheater like water in a bowl. Kavanaugh stood by a hatch where the corridor crew could see him and the wrench on his belt, and know both were there because we trusted law first. I took my place at the rail. Iridal 7 began with an origin myth read the way a man recites what his father recited. It was a story about scarcity, about a time when the gates choked and the corridor held back a flood by asking for small cups of water along the banks. It was convincing because it was true. The corridor had saved 1,000 worlds. The cups had become barrels. The barrels had become a river running the other direction. The myth had not kept up with the plumbing. We honor yesterday without letting it tax tomorrow. At the first pivot, I asked him to read the amendments that allowed distant auditors to collect local gratitude without local presence. He read. His voice held, but the corners of his mouth did not. The Star Court asked about signatures. He showed them. Men with good faces had signed those lines. Men whose hands had not washed a harness bandage held the pens. At the second pivot, Kaito displayed a time-lapse of corridor amendments against a graph of pirate raids, flares, famine transfers, and ship failures. It looked like storm fronts learning to map each other. In the bad years, the corridor had come close. In the good years, it had called this closeness a permanent duty and sent invoices. We asked them to show their calloused palms. They showed spreadsheets. The Star Court, to their credit, asked for both. They requested 3 gate facilitators who had lived through 2 famines to tell their part of the myth. They requested recordings of water lifted. They requested a list of local welds done with corridor stick. The corridor crew moved like a hive around their terminals, pulling down good stories and better receipts. The amphitheater watched a world try to remember where it had truly walked. Between the second and third pivot, a small boy stood on his seat and shouted that his mom says numbers are only as good as the people who use them. The clerk told him to sit. The court noted the insight. The mirror picked up a tiny hum that hadn't been there before and added it to a layer I did not recognize until Arclight whispered, "That is the room. We make rooms sing, then count the music." When the third pivot came, Iridal 7 did not try to hide his pain. He introduced a clause that allowed a gratitude surcharge during times of moral confusion. It was an old phrase. It had been used during a war that had confused everyone. It had not been repealed. For 23 years after the war, the surcharge had remained small enough not to scream large enough to bruise. Hassan did not raise his voice. Moral confusion, he said, means the days when we cannot tell right from wrong. Those are precisely the days when you do not change the tax. The Star Court asked for a show of hands, who in the amphitheater had paid a surcharge they did not understand. Half the hands rose. Some kept rising as if they had more to say, then fell because they were hands, not mouths. The mirror arrays tallied the lifts. The numbers found each other like cousins meeting at a funeral. The mirror made a sound like a sigh. We were not alone in our confusion. We were seen. By the time the mid-period bell rang, the Covenant had been cut into forms that could stand in this gravity. It had not been destroyed. It had been opened. The Star Court, working through a gate woman who had the patience of a mechanic and the focus of a monk, ordered an immediate suspension of the surcharge, a stay on local collection, pending recalibration, and a return of improper extractions to begin within 30 days under audit. It wasn't the end. It was the first binding band of something you could hold without hurting yourself. We choose binds that heal. Then the corridor pulled the last string they have always loved. Gratitude not as money or ore, but as service. A service draft under emergency doctrine. A draft for our kids. The clause had dust in its grooves. It had been written during a plague. It had broken ships and hearts and boards and bones throughout an arm of the galaxy. The clause had never been repealed. The corridor requested its immediate application. For a moment I heard only the cat bell. Moriah's hands tightened. The old man with the cap shook so his receipts rustled. The welders' mouths went small the way men's mouths go small when their stomachs do what their eyes cannot. Iridal 7 did not smile. He had to know we would fight him here in a way that would end the court and start the old song with new instruments. I did not look at Kavanaugh. I did not look at Arclight. I looked at the Star Court and invoked the clause that puts your heart into your mouth like a hot coin. Under Aurora Court statute and under the Treaty of Three Gates, I said we propose a mirror service alternative. The clerk's eyes flicked. The court's screens leaned if screens can lean. Proceed, the gate woman said. We will match your service, I said, hour for hour with hours already performed that you have never counted. We will present public work done during emergencies that was not ordered by the corridor, and we will debit it against any draft. We will not engage in a conversation about collared service when the mirror shows we have been serving without collars all along. Hassan's hands were steady on the rail. Kaito's stylus stopped moving the way the world stops when you realize you might not die today. Kavanaugh whispered, "It'll either sing or explode." We opened the human ledger. It was not a book. It was a cloud of tiny lights that pulsed in the mirror arrays like fish in a night river. Every emergency call, every unpaid overtime, every bucket brigade, every breakfast cooked for crew that had not slept, every hand that held a line in a gale, every time someone had welded someone else's hatch because it was the right thing to do. The mirror had been watching for 1,000 days. Arclight had been feeding it with a patient spoon. We do not ask you to believe us. We show you our hands. There is a danger in that much light. It can turn into praise. It can make us think we are owed. I felt it rise and pushed it down. Then I made the ask that would save us from ourselves. We do not claim these hours because we are heroes, I said. We claim them because they are work. We claim them as a counter-service not to steal your myth, but to make ours share a table with it. We ask the court to weigh it. We ask the corridor to obey the weight. Iridal 7 had 1,000 arguments. He used none. He understood that the corridor's myth would die of embarrassment if he said the hours of men like the welders did not count, because no one ordered them. He nodded once in acknowledgement to an opponent who had managed to fight without making him less human. He had been raised by a father who called gratitude a poem. He had just learned to rhyme on a dock. We do not break enemies. We bend customs. The Star Court spoke. We accept mirror service, they said. Respondent will submit service drafts with offsets. Petitioners will submit hours under oath. Abuse of offset will be punished as theft. Abuse of draft will be punished as enslavement. Returned costs will be visible on the public ledger. The amphitheater did not cheer. Some leaned into each other with the weight kept back during storms. The welders put their foreheads together once awkwardly. Moria exhaled into her girl's hair and made another creak that was as sacred as any gate tone. The old man with the cap smiled with the 2 teeth he had left and took his receipt back out so he could hold it up to the light again to be sure it was still there. We pay back with law. Iridal 7 signaled the barge to open a window in its hull. A small case slid out and bridged the air to the court's rail on a bright ribbon like a spine made visible. He placed the case on the rail and opened it with a key his father would have recognized in the dark. Inside were the 2 remaining bars. They made the light stupid around them, the way metal does when it has never lied about what it is. We return them, he said. It was a gesture. It was admission. It was a small obedience in the face of a large habit. The court noted it. The mirror weighed it. Arclight dimmed her Aurora as if to bow without groveling. Hassan put one hand flat on the glass near the bars and did not touch them, because things that belong to the people are best met with palms and not with fingers. The day could have ended there. A commander might have led it. I felt the deck tilt again. In my bones, a long, slow movement of a ship when someone moves in a neighboring cabin. That movement was the corridor remembering how to be proud. That movement was the danger. I made the fourth escalation. We do not stop at sermons. We draft law. Star Court. I said we propose a precedent. We propose that any future gratitude covenant in the gates must be accompanied by a mirror clause. All takings must be recorded in public light and offset by local mirrors. All service drafts must accept mirror service. All codicils requiring venue beyond one leap are void as traps. The gatewoman's voice acquired a current that made the hairs rise on my arms. Petitioners propose, she said, a mirror clause. Name it, Hassan whispered. Aurora clause, Kaito said. Kavanaugh nodded out of habit. He likes things you can hang a wrench on. Iridal 7 closed his eyes once briefly. He had just seen his life's instrument tuned to a pitch he did not know. Then he opened them and surprised me by speaking into his own ending. We consent, he said, with adjustments to protect corridor stability. Adjustments will be heard, the court said. We had moved the room. We had not burned it. The cost of victory came due while the court drafted the first words of the Aurora clause, and Arclight sang quietly in the rails. A shudder went through the station like a muscle learning it is tired after a fight. A minor quake in the ice belt had jarred a tether. A cargo platform drifted and kissed a docking ring, and a child fell off a crate. The child was not Moria's. The child was a boy with hair like he had run fast all morning, and cheeks that made old women give him sweets he had not earned yet. He hit the deck with his shoulder, and I heard a noise that lives in bones. The amphitheater turned in one piece. Kavanaugh moved first. He vaulted the rail without a pause. Hassan was an inch behind him. Kaito threw her stylus, and it clattered on the deck and rolled under the clerk's stand. The welders were third because of habit never run until the officer says run. I did not move for a second because leadership is choosing which cost to pay. Then I did. We keep promises with hands, not words. By the time we reached the boy, he was crying, but conscious. His arm had a wrong bend. Hassan spoke to him like men speak who are trying not to scare a child whose pain is a precedent. The welders splinted with a strip of their own shirt and a square of crate cardboard because law had not yet produced a medical order, and you never wait on law for bone. The court paused the sitting. Iridal 7 did not look away. He had a son somewhere who had fallen off a crate. Arclight hummed. Let me give you a small grace, she said to no one and everyone, and turned the ambient light soft because light is medicine when a child is hurt. We carried him to Med. His mother met us in the hall with a terror that had already burned through anger and come out the other side into resolve. She thanked no one because thanks is the wrong word when your child's arm is wrong. She nodded once and followed the gurney. Costs must be named to be honored. When I returned to the court, the Star Court had accepted the first line of the Aurora clause, and Iridal 7 had sent a note to the boy's mother offering to cover the med bill. The note was polite. The offer was declined. The boy's mother wrote a sentence that I will teach to every crew I command until I die. We will accept your regret when your law makes it unnecessary. You can put that on a wall. By evening, the Aurora clause had 4 lines and a promise to grow teeth. The Star Ledger entry for the suspension of moral confusion, surcharges, blinked confirmed beside the names of 22 venues. The 2 bars were sealed in court custody. The corridor committed to present its full amendment provenance within 10 days with penalties if missing pages were lost. Arclight cooled without complaint and asked for a pause after dark to run a diagnostic on a thruster coupling that had not been used. I told her to rest. She told me resting would help me speak tomorrow. This is what partnership feels like when it is not romanticized beyond usefulness. It is one mind telling another the most practical good. We closed for the night with a simple bell. The welders touched the rail and went home to beds with noise from neighbor rooms. Moria's girl fell asleep with her cat bell in her palm. The old man with the cap met the baker, and they spoke about the price of flour in a world where gratitude would be counted in loaves again. I walked the long arc to the docking bays and found Iridal 7 standing alone by the viewing blister, where the comet tails wrote their silk across the dark. He nodded when he saw me and did not offer a hand. I was trained, he said, to think of courts like yours as places where feelings bully truth. I was trained, I said, to think of corridors like yours as places where truth goes to forget how to sweat. We are both wrong sometimes. He watched the tails. The gate woman will not give you everything you want. She will protect us. She will protect the gate, I said. That is the same thing if you ask the right question. He was quiet a long time. Your mirror is dangerous, he said. So is the collar, I said. We choose. He nodded slowly. We choose. He left without farewell. His thin crewman with the scar looked at me from the barge and raised a hand that meant good luck. I raised mine back. We would see each other in rooms like this again. On my way to sleep that was not sleep, I passed the public ledger board. It had been mounted crooked decades ago, and no one had fixed it, because you do not fix the tilt of a thing that has held the truth that long. The entry for the surcharge suspension blinked. The entry for the bartender blinked. The entry for the Aurora clause held not blinking, because that kind of thing must not flash. It must burn. History is written in wrists and welds. The next morning would bring the counter-argument. We had not yet heard a scholar who would say that gratitude is a glue you cannot weigh because it lives in the heart, and that attempting to weigh it kills the thing itself. He would be wrong and right in ways that make rooms fight when they should sing. We would need a 5th escalation, one that sings and makes rules at the same time. We would need to ask the mirror to weigh an intangible without insulting the part of us that keeps giving when no one is watching. We would need to draft a clause that says generosity is not taxable, kindness is not collateral, and care is not a currency someone else can spend. We would need to hurt something to learn that. Maybe it would be our pride. Maybe it would be a habit. Maybe it would be the way we tell our children stories about saints that make them forget their mother's harness creaking in the night when the coolant line blows. We would do it in the house with the brass bell in front of our neighbors under the light that counts, and the darkness that forgives with a ship mind that remembers every bead and never tightens a knot without asking who will bleed. We will do it with law, not knives. The scholar arrived before the first bell, wrapped in a coat that looked like a night sky turned inside out. He had the long hands of someone who writes in margins and the careful steps of a man raised to think floors listen. He introduced himself as Master Halid Var Jurisprudence and Cultural Obligation Gate 2, Fellow Third Chair of the Gratitude Canon. He bowed almost low enough to be a mechanic and the welders watched him the way good men watch a new tool, wary of the edge and hopeful for the use. His eyes did not blink quickly, which meant he did not fear the room yet. Our stakes were his thesis dressed for a walk in the rain. Words can cut clean without drawing blood. He began with a story about a fire in a town of wood long before rail or star. A stranger had come with buckets and a pump. The town had lived. Years later, when hay caught, the stranger was gone, but the town had kept the habit of buckets and pumps. And that memory was gratitude, a glue between generations. To tax the glue, he said gently, is to make it brittle. To measure it with scales invites bribery of the heart. Gratitude is not money. Gratitude is culture. The covenant codified the culture. Hassan tilted his head. And when a man sells culture by the pound, Khalid Var did not flinch. Then the man is wicked, he said, not the glue. When a covenant is perverted, we do not abolish covenant. We purify it. Purity without proof is just perfume. The Star Court invited him to continue. He laid out a lattice of case names and quotes that had saved good people in bad winters. He showed a famine transfer where a gate levy properly applied had fed a belt. He read a letter from a grandmother who had taught her granddaughter to say thanks to ships that never broke docking clamps. Every line was a coin rubbed thin by honest fingers. In a different room, he would have won by the second paragraph. Arclight dimmed her Aurora one shade, which meant respect. Kaito whispered, "He's right about the glue, and then he's wrong about the tax. Master Khalid Var, I said what is the harm specifically of a mirror, not a tithe, not a collar. A mirror that tells the truth and returns the surplus." He folded his coat over the rail and touched the wood where 1,000 jackets had polished it. "Mirrors change behavior," he said. "You build for the glass. You perform for the room. A gift given for the ledger is not a gift. It is an invoice disguised." A baker in the back murmured loud enough for the drone to catch that most ledgers are made for bread, not applause. The clerk warned him gently. The Star Court watched me without blinking at all. "Let the room lift the weight." "I agree," I said, "that kindness dies when sold. We do not propose to weigh kindness. We propose to weigh takings that call themselves kindness so loudly they drown out the quiet kind. We will draft a wall no invoice can climb." Khalid Var nodded slowly. "Propose your wall." "Gifts are excluded," I said. "A gift is an act without a claim. If a corridor contribution is non-reciprocal, made without obligation, language, and without later enforcement, the mirror will mark it as a gift and leave it beyond tax. But when a contribution arrives with a lien and a schedule and a threat of venue at a distance, it is not a gift. It is an invoice. We will weigh invoices. Gifts do not wear handcuffs." He liked that line more than he wanted to show. He swallowed, and the sound went into the microphone the way rust goes into old water pipes. "What about reputation?" he asked. "What about glory? If the mirror excludes coin, men will trade thanks for fame. We have seen it. I have seen it." "Then we exclude fame," Kaito said softly. "We write that public honor is not a currency that can pay a bill." Hassan tapped the rail. "We will call it the courtesy shield," he said. "Courtesy cannot be taxed." The Star Court looked at Iridal 7. He held his hands open in a posture that meant he would fight this on a different day. Khalid Var breathed through his teeth and then surprised me by turning to his own house and lighting a small lamp in a dark room. "Legally," he said, "I can accept the courtesy shield. Culturally, I will argue it must be taught with the covenant, or the covenant will rot again. If you do not teach the habit of checking the well, someone will sell the bucket. Teach the habit, or the house burns." The court marked our wall. The mirror arrays shifted the first layer of their language. A new color appeared, a warm amber that meant act without invoice. A second color followed, a clear green meaning honor without claim. The arrays kept the spectral blue for contribution without contact. The amphitheater learned the new hues quickly because people who live by meters learn new scales as fast as hunger requires. Iridal 7 used the next gap to move a piece that had been waiting under his sleeve. Respondent requests, he said, that mirror service hours be capped when performed by petitioners to prevent hero inflation. We cannot accept a ledger where every kindness becomes a tax credit. He pretended to be guarding the glue. He was guarding the collar. Caps can be gamed, I said. Caps punish big storms. We propose instead a filter. Mirror service hours qualify only when performed to prevent harm or repair damage during declared emergencies with third-party witness and when no corridor order exists. If your men ordered it, it is yours. If our people did it because a child was cold, it can offset a draft. Receipts love clean definitions. The Star Court wrote the filter into the air in lines you could see buffer before they settled. Haledvar nodded again, then lifted a finger. We also need a rule against conversion, he said. You may not turn a gift into an invoice by calling it gratitude after the fact, and you may not turn a draft into a gift by calling the hours community service. Kaito smiled without showing teeth. We can write that. The court wrote it. The arrays sang a small new tone like a spoon tapped on a mug. We were building a thing you could live under without flinching. Plan-changing escalation flared an hour later when a secondary feed lit up with a corridor symbol I had learned to dislike as much as any in my life. A tight beam from Gate 3 arrived with urgent stability posture in the header. A harvest world near the seam reported raiders skimming at dusk, cutting tractor belts, and promising to leave only silence. Corridor ships had cleared their lanes for audit. The field was thin. The compact requested immediate service drafts from our station under emergency sharing doctrine. They wanted our kids while we were writing rules to protect them. The amphitheater cooled fast. Moria's knuckles whitened on her harness. The welders both looked at their boots, then at the boy whose arm had been set in med and who had returned with a sling and a stubborn jaw. Iridal 7 watched the Star Court, the way a man watches a judge who is also a cousin, hopeful for mercy, confident in family, capable of forgetting the rest of us in the moment. Haledvar did not sit. He did not smile. He did not bow. He raised both hands like a conductor who woke to a fire alarm and spoke in a voice I will remember until the rails forget me. Do not break the thing you are building, he said. Drafts under emergency doctrine destroy gratitude. They always have. We must protect the seam. We must not use the oldest tool. Courage is choosing to argue with your own blood. The Star Court asked for options. Iridal 7 began to recite the only way, but his thin crewman with the scar touched his sleeve and shook his head once. That man had seen something yesterday he could not unknot, and had decided not to pretend otherwise. Iridal 7 stopped. He let us think. Arclight brightened without changing her hue. Mirror root, she said. We can export hours. We can export numbers. We can export lessons. We can teach the harvest world how to move like a weld team when clamps break and noise rises. We can send a shield made of other people's hands. Explain, the court said. We cannot be there with bodies without drafting. Arclight said, but we can be there with knowledge. We can cut the raiders' incentive by making their raid expensive in public in the moment, by mirroring their takings and charging them in the gate for it. We can announce the ledger while the belt is still cutting. We can place their bill in their pocket before they come home. Make theft cost more than appetite can pay. Hassan leaned forward. You're proposing a live mirror. Yes, Arclight said. A live feed to the gate, same moment in the language a raider's fence understands. We mark stolen tonnage in public with cereals and moisture content, declare it debt against future transit, and bind it to a gate escrow that their patrons cannot ignore. We keep the harvest without firing a cannon. Kaito's stylus shivered. We'll need their censors, she said. We'll need their honest minutes. We'll need their trust when the raid comes. Halidvar gave a short, stunned laugh. You intend to make accountants into shields. We intend to make cost visible where knives glitter, I said. Give us a corridor channel to the harvest world. Give us 1 hour. The court granted it. The corridor did not refuse because refusal would look like a preference for callers when cameras run. Iridal 7 sent the link. The amphitheater leaned around the screens until the welders stood on their toes like boys. The harvest world smelled like dust and bruised grass. You could hear the night insects through the mics and a chain creak as someone leaned a shoulder against it so it would not sing at the worst moment. The local magistrate's voice had the grit of a road you wash with rain once a year and sweep with brooms the rest. We don't have ships to give you, she said. We have tractors and a church. Give us their cereals, Kaito said. Give us last year's haul weights. Give us 2 honest men with chalk. 2 men with chalk stepped forward while fear rolled behind them like thunder. A boy held a bucket of dust to throw on numbers so they would not sweat off once written. A woman with a baby on her hip leaned in view on purpose so the raiders would know what would be counted if they took. We fight with pencils when knives are cheap. Arclight wove the arrays into the live feed. The mirror above our heads filled with golden grass and small figures that looked like stitches on a quilt. Then it filled with numbers labeled in our language and theirs. As the raiders crested in squat ships that looked like horses brutally shorn, their comms crackled with the sound of a gate escrow opening. 2 nearby fences pinged with a new lien against any goods matching our numbers by moisture and density at purchase. Someone had taught their machines to listen to our mirror. We had just made the world smaller without narrowing it. Halidvar whispered, "They will test you." They did. The first raider skimmed a belt and cut it. The belt snapped and flung a line of grain like a comet tail behind his ship. The mirror marked the tonnage before it hit the ground. The escrow subtracted the payout. The raider's fence chirped a warning that made his throat dry. He cut another belt to see if it was luck. The number appeared like a name called out in a dark yard. He swore. He pulled up. Make harm meet a bill before it tastes good. 3 more tried. 2 peeled when the ledger wrote on their faces. 1 blasted a tractor out of spite. The magistrate did not cry out. She narrowed her eyes because pain deserves at least 1 squint before it gets a name. The mirror marked the tractor as service and opened a gate fee that would bite a corridor patron's ankle for a year. The raider's ship faltered by a whisper as his credit shrugged, then flinched. Iridal 7 was watching with a smile he did not know he wore. Halidvar had his fingers pressed together, like he was praying, and maybe he was to a god that does not eat children or use gratitude as a net. The Star Court spoke into both channels at once with the calm of a surgeon and the mercy of a baker who adds an extra heel for a boy with hungry eyes. This, they said, is lawful shield. Numbers can stand between a hand and a throat. The raiders withdrew first, then circled to study what had frightened them. The magistrate held the chalkboard higher because pride can be a weapon when turned toward safety. The mirror logged the hour. The escrow sealed. The harvest went on with belts that squeaked like old men's knees. The baby slept. The boy with the dust dipped his hand and threw a little cloud in the air just to watch the golden light turn it into a planet for a heartbeat. We teach strangers to use our tools and call them friends after. Cost came with the shield, as cost always does. Arclight spun up her processors more than she liked to hold the live mirror under interference from the Raiders' jammers. The heat that had scarred her yesterday returned in a different pattern, a spider web that crawled through her lattice and bit at the points where she remembers first. She did not complain. Kaito cursed short and hard and called for a water coil that hissed like a patient snake. We cooled our friend with the same careful hands we use on a child who drinks too fast after running. Our machines bleed differently, but they still bleed. After the harvest, world's dusk had passed, and the magistrate had kissed her baby, and the boy had been made to sleep without chalk. The Star Court set the mirror service doctrine with a single crisp line. In emergencies, lawful shields may be erected by mirrors, and mirror service hour exports may offset drafts. Drafts must prefer shields to collars, and collars are forbidden where shields suffice. Haled Var smiled then properly with his eyes. You have taught the gates a new habit, he said. You will need to keep teaching it. Habits become laws when someone bothers to say them out loud at dinner. Teach the dinner table, and you save a decade. Iridal 7 requested a recess long enough to speak to his patrons with the humility of a man who sees a world continue without his grip. The Star Court granted it. During the break, the boy with the sling came back to the amphitheater with a new swagger and a pain pallor. His mother walked behind him like a tugboat. He stared at the mirror until his mouth opened a little and asked if it could draw a cat. Arclight drew a small, brass-belled cat in the lower corner that winked every time a receipt confirmed. She did not tell anyone she had done it. The room laughed like a place that knows how to choose its joy without permission. Joy is a receipt you don't need to file. When the court reconvened, Iridal 7 had the face of someone who has eaten a bitter fruit and discovered it keeps you alive. He accepted the mirror service doctrine, the courtesy shield, the exclusion of fame, and the filter. He fought on two lines that mattered to his bosses. He wanted a sunset clause that would expire the Aurora clause after 20 years, and he wanted the right to audit mirror service hours with corridor agents on site. No sunset, the Star Court said. Precedent stands, until revoked by equal or greater law. You may audit on site, but your auditors will sit in rooms like this, with bells like this, and mirrors like these. They will ask for receipts, not blood. I felt the room breathe again. We were almost through when the corridor sprang a quiet trap of their own, and I admire them for waiting this long to try it. A courier delivered a packet of provenance for the Covenant's amendments. One page was missing, replaced with a blank that smelled faintly of lemon. Their cover letter called it lost in transit. The missing page contained the signature that had extended the moral confusion surcharge beyond its first legal term. Without it, the surcharge looked accidental, a clerk's oversight, a kindness abused by locals, not the corridor. The lemon could have been cleaner's residue. It could have been theater. Either way, it was a sin against paper. Kaito looked at the blank like a doctor looks at a bruise that does not match a fall. Haledvar winced. Iridal 7 did not move. He was not careless. His bosses had sent him a decoy he had to hand to us and pray we were too busy to smell it. Arclight spoke without light for a long, still moment. We have salvage, she said finally. 15 years ago, when corridor auditors did not return for the bars, they also did not return for a crate of waterlogged files recovered from a customs office, panicked during a flare. We logged and stored them with the bars. We notified. No one came. I think your lemon is in our snow. Haladvar laughed, honest and delighted. The Lord loves a pedant, he said. The crate came up from a cold locker with frost like lace on its corners. Hassan pried it open with a crowbar and a prayer that did not have a name. Inside, tied with string, were files that smelled like a storm on a tin roof. Kaito lifted each carefully, as if the paper had pain, and Arclight scanned without cursing the water stains. We found the page. The signature was not a clerk. It was a board. It had ink that had bled like a truth learning to run. Some ghosts sign their own confessions. The Star Court read the signature, read it again, then read the lemon letter one more time as if to give it a chance to wash itself white. It did not. They ordered an immediate gate inspector inquiry into document tampering under color of audit and added a line to the public ledger with the teeth of a trap turned against its hunter. The board does not like to bleed. They will remember this cut. A murmur ran through the corridor crew. The thin man with the scar looked young, suddenly like a boy who had just seen his father steal bread. Iridal 7 did not defend the lemon. He lowered his head and he held it there for 3 counts, which is what a man does when he chooses not to be cheap. We were done chasing ghosts. It was time to tie knots that would hold without turning into collars when the room emptied and memory went back to work. The Star Court read the Aurora clause aloud, each line heavy and precise like a beam set with 4 hands. First, all takings under gratitude covenants in gate jurisdiction must be recorded in public light in the venue where they are claimed. Local mirrors have standing and their balances phoned. Second, non-reciprocal acts and honors without claim are exempt from calculation. Courtesy cannot be taxed. Third service drafts under emergency doctrine must prefer mirror service shields. Collared service is forbidden where lawful shields suffice. Fourth, codicils that set venue beyond 1 leap without local assent are void as traps. Fifth, provenance of amendments must be filed with signatures and minutes. Falsification or concealment is an offense against the gates. The amphitheater did not cheer. No one cried. We all stood still for a 3 count, as if we were holding a beam while someone put in the last bolt. Then Hassan breathed, and the room remembered itself, and people touched rails, and people and old caps and harnesses and children. The baker cried then because bread is patient until someone says it is allowed to be a celebration. We win when the quiet is full of relief. Costs came due in a different ledger that afternoon. Kavanaugh found me by the viewing blister, with his hand wrapped tight in cloth and blood seeping at the edges like a letter written too quickly. He had caught his palm on a torn grommet while carrying the file crate. He had not said a word because the boy was watching and because he is proud like gravity. I cleaned it while he did not flinch. He will have a scar that looks like the crate lived under his skin. Our laws write on our bodies, too. Arclight asked for a full shutdown of her lattice for 4 minutes to reseat a memory line that had pulled during the live mirror. 4 minutes feels like a year when your ship mind goes dark. The rails hummed and then did not. The amphitheater held its breath without being told. When the light came back, it was not exactly the same color. It was richer by a note we might not have earned. Arclight spoke once to me alone. I dropped 1 hour, she said. A childhood song from a long, quiet ring. I will rebuild it from hints. I will be less perfect and more ours. Perfection breaks. Partnership heals. We entered the durable consequence on the ledger at dusk, when the comet tails were gray instead of silver. The clerk polished the crooked board with the sleeve of a robe she did not need. The Star Court stood with their several screens, like a choir finding the last note before sitting. The welders signed as witnesses, Moria's girl dinged her brass-belled cat softly, and the sound went into the entry we were about to make, as if the ledger believed music counted. Halidvar read the precedent line. He read it like a man who had carried buckets when he was young and could feel water slosh when he closed his eyes. He read it like a promise you make to a room, not a vow you shout at the sky. When the pen touched the ledger, the world did not shudder. It tilted very slightly toward decency, and the tilt will outlast me. People left in pairs, then knots, then, as solitary men who had work in the morning and needed sleep. Iridal 7 paused by the rail, set a hand on the wood, and said to no one in particular and to everyone in earshot that the compact would file within 72 hours, and that he would bring his father to see the court one day when it would not hurt him. The thin man with the scar asked the welders for coffee instructions. The welders argued because every family has a coffee fight that never ends. The boy with the sling told the baker he would carry bread when his arm went straight, and meant it like a contract. And when the lights dimmed to night, and the comet tails failed to be blue and became only dark. Arclight cast a small square of pale on the public board, so the last entry would not wait for dawn to be visible to anyone who walked home the long way. A public ledger entry blinked, confirmed. I walked the promenade once more until the cold on the glass bit my palm. I spoke softly into the rail, a habit my mother taught me when rooms were loud, and you needed to tell the wall a secret you could live with. I spoke to the welders and to Moria, and to the boy who will always be a little less afraid of falling. I spoke to Iridal 7 and to Halidvar, and to the gate woman whose voice carried grief like a cathedral carries dust. I spoke to Arclight, who pretends she does not like praise and loves it when it is honest and short. I promised to keep ringing the bell even when no one is watching, and to raise receipts like lanterns, and to teach the habits that keep the glue soft and the nets cut. Tomorrow they will test the claws with silver tongues and old knives. Tomorrow we will show them the cost of a collar in ink and then in faces. Tomorrow we will tie one more knot that holds without tightening on a child's wrist. If I must pay, I will pay the price that makes the room safer to stand in. If I must lose, I will lose loudly enough that the next crew knows where the floor gives. If I must speak alone, I will speak as if the whole station is listening, because they always are, and because law grows in the soil of our mouths. The court beacon cooled like a stove after bread. We are not saints or saviors or the kind of heroes who end wars with one strike. We are welders of rules and carriers of buckets and keepers of bells. We will remember by ledgers, teach by numbers, sing by rails, and love by making sure the receipts are good enough to trust when the lights go out. We will hold the room together without collars. We will take our scars and write their names on paper. We paid back with law and made the gates remember.